Welcome to the Silicon Fox podcast, where we explore the habits and stories of high performers. I'm your host, Mitchell Eschner. Well, Joe, thank you so much for hopping on the Silicon Fox podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I always like to start these out. I'll just give you a second, give us your background, what led to what you're doing today, what are you doing today? Let us set the scene before we dive into some of our deeper topics.
Love it. So, I'm a scientist or investor, PhD biochemist. Got into it because I freaking love science. That's all I want to do. It's all I've ever wanted to do. But I've been steadily drifting, from being at the bench all day, every day, over to the dark side. I started off in, my grad school doing cell signaling work and C. elegans, very, very fundamental basic biochemistry. Went out into biotech, started in product roles, moved over to BD, spent most of my career in biotech in kind of the life science tools, data generation side of the world. Had some success there, ended up leading BD for a startup that we sold to Roche. Spent a couple of years inside of Roche before kind of falling to be an investor. Joined Madrona 3 years ago to help build out our life science investing here.
I love it. And to give us a quick background on Madrona, and also just so we define terms here, we were even talking before this, biotech, digital health, this is all become one. Let's just segment them, and you know this probably best, so give us the breakdowns here.
Absolutely. So Madrona is a 30-year-old venture fund based here in Seattle. We're on a sunny November day here, not usual. But we have been a pillar of the Seattle tech scene forever.
Yeah.
We're the first institutional check into Amazon.
Nice.
And have had a lot of success in the tech world. Probably 6 or 7 years ago, before I joined, we started moving over into the life sciences and really kind of the intersection of life and data sciences. I think it's one of the most exciting trends and one of the most exciting times for the life science industry, but also a super exciting time for how we can start applying tech solutions to solve really intractable, real world problems. And we're not the only people who see this.
Yeah.
But we've been building out that thesis for several years now.
And life sciences is what? So specifically?
Totally. So I would say the breadth of what we'll do in life sciences, digital health inside of Madrona is, relatively broad. We're a generalist firm. So we've done, healthcare deals for, many, many, many years. Specifically for life sciences, we're broad across, drug development, drug discovery. We have lots of kind of hey, how do you use tech tooling, AI, ML to really unlock some new types of drugs or some new insights that can drive drug development innovation. But also we've invested in life science tools, how you generate new data at different scales that are unlocking for the life science industry. We invested in, AI software to help unlock insight for life sciences. We invest in some diagnostics. Really, for us, I think the key is this thread between where is there this amazing intersection between the generating the data at a scale or at a depth that wasn't possible before, but then also using all we've learned in the tech side of the world to clean that data, to make sure that data is well available to the scientists on the ground doing the work every day. I think the state of play in life sciences is actually relatively kind of sad sometimes with how you deal with data. Sometimes you're going to do these massive data experiments and you're just going to throw it into an Excel file and save it to a hard drive somewhere.
Yeah.
That's not the way that we're going to make the next generation of breakthroughs in life sciences. I think you see those same things in, digital health and whatnot, where, too often you're faxing a document somewhere and well, that's kind of stupid if we're going to really try to bring efficiencies to things like healthcare. There's tech solutions we can put in to drive efficiencies, to drive better patient outcomes. And so it's that kind of theme across the breadth of the, life sciences, across digital health, across, even things like wearables, right? All those things are going to come together. And, for us, we're not a specific firm and hey, we have a thesis, we're going to invest in this one drug target. Hey, we're going to invest in this one specific kind of niche because we have a deep conviction that this is going to be it. We certainly have places where we have some conviction we're looking for the best company in the space, but oftentimes it's looking for that amazing entrepreneur who has that key insight that's going to unlock a market and really drive kind of step function changes rather than kind of incremental turn of benefit or efficiency.
And this is because just like you guys are you operate at the earlier
We
stages,
do.
which is why. Okay, got it.
Yeah, we're
And
mostly a seed and A fund. And
got
so,
it.
like, I would say the vast majority of deals that I've done and been involved with here have almost been day zero or
Yeah,
day one. So, we'll go find a grad student or a postdoc or a professor that has this amazing idea. And they're like, I'm interested in a company, but I'm not necessarily have a company going out, doing a big process. And I think it's most exciting for me to say, hey, like we can actually catalyze that with you.
yeah.
I would never consider myself like a co-founder of these companies, right? It's the amazing scientist or entrepreneur who's driving that forward, but being able to say like, hey, this is possible. Can we help? Can we breathe it? Be there to catalyze this journey coming together is like amazing.
Yeah, so this is interesting, and I guess I have a kind of a two-pronged question here that I want to dive into. Well, one specific to you, a scientist turned investor. What are some of these things that have been really valuable going from academia and these places to now on the investing side, beyond
Mhm.
maybe the typical that we would assume, like, okay, you can evaluate the science a little
Yeah,
better
yeah.
than most investors. Beyond that, have there been correlations that have been useful?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple pieces that are useful. Like one is just like you're dealing with your people,
Yeah,
like coming in from a background of like having done academic science, having done the startup thing, like, you have some scar tissue, you have some lessons that you can learn. Like I'm not, certainly a like career like operator. Like I'm still relatively early in my career, I like to think.
yeah,
Um, but it's like, hey, I kind of been there, I kind of done that. Like I know what this takes. And I think you also get kind of a turn of like, I can see what type of person it's going to take, and they should be driven by the things that like I can see have led to success in, portions of my early career. I think that it's really right to find the right partner for this.
yeah,
Like you're going to be like more than married to a person who is your investor. Like
yeah,
it's way easier to get divorced than get someone off your cap table. And so it's like this has to be this match of like, hey, wait, do we view the world together in a similar way? Are we excited to start on this journey together?
yeah,
Like, and so like that's where I think I bring a bias.
yeah.
So I'll bias my own founders I work with based on kind of my lived experience.
For sure. And like I think one objective that'd be super interesting if we even take away today would be like what is this subset of things that you're looking for
Yeah.
beyond like, okay, we know grit,
Yeah.
we know these
Yeah. Yeah.
things that we can answer
You
on a
know, you gotta
surface
want to
level.
chew glass.
Yeah, yeah. Like so this like
Yeah.
we hear about, but going even deeper, maybe like
Hmm.
specific to
Yeah.
life sciences. And what
Hmm.
that leads me to ask is academia, this is
Hmm.
like a relatively not becoming more of a controversial, is like does that what it take? And
Yeah.
is that necessary for building in this space?
Hmm.
What are your thoughts here? Because of course, like, in our experience to some degrees, like these NSF SBIRs,
Yep.
NIHs is like, well, we go out to write a grant, and then
Hmm.
we know what the NIH is like. We need
Hmm.
someone on the team who's an MD, PhD, or like an MD or a PhD. Like a team of a bunch of bachelor students it's not going to go very well,
Yeah.
right? Because there's some accreditation and there's some
Yeah.
value to that. But I'm curious now that you've seen some of these cycles go through, is that true, or is that just like a better initial filtering mechanism?
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of of two minds on this. Like, on one hand, I think it's super important, especially in something like biology, to have some gray hair. And it doesn't have to be like literal gray hair, but like having lived and seen just how hard it can be and how counterintuitive it can be is really important. I feel that when you're building in a space that is just like truly the most difficult thing we do in humanity and like drug development,
Yeah,
like you can't engineer your way around it. Like we're still at like a 90% failure rate for drug development. And so having some of the experience I think is really important. That being said, does it have to be a PhD? Does it have to be an MD? Like I definitely do not think so.
yeah,
Right? Like there's amazing operators who have spent their careers in life sciences without a PhD. Like it probably is better to have spent some time building a company. That being said, like it doesn't have to be the founder.
yeah,
So I think
yeah,
one of those things I really like seeing is you'll have this amazing young entrepreneur. I think we've done a bad job in life sciences, particularly about trying to fund someone who's theoretically young, but actually like relatively old by Silicon Valley standards, like a 35-year-old who is finishing a postdoc or just has like their first faculty appointment. Like they don't know anything about drug development, right?
yeah,
Like that's something that, you've just finished your academic training. If you can take that person with a unique biology insight, a unique like, oh, I can see a future that's really interesting, really different, and bring someone in who has put drugs in the clinic, has, learned some of the difficulties that come along with drug development, like that's a really interesting combo for me. It's really, really hard to say like what risk are you layering on? Like, are you going to take biology risk? Are you going after a new target? Are you taking just execution risk of, hey, we are going to go after a known target, but we're going to try to develop a new way to do it? And then you're like, there's just risk you shouldn't layer on, especially like for drug development. Like, there's just ways things are done. Like, you probably shouldn't innovate on much CMC, right? Just go hire someone who's done your manufacturing before, who's done clinical studies before, because like, I'll give you one quick example, right? I'll go out to academia, I'll talk to a lab, and it's like, oh, we spent 2 years, we showed some amazing data, like we cured this mouse of, diabetes or cancer or whatever. And then you can go talk to someone in pharma and they're like, yeah, we don't like that model. We don't believe it. Like you had to do this rat or this dog or whatever it
Yeah.
is. You're like, well, you probably should have talked to that person so that you didn't waste 2 years working on a model that no one outside of academia believes. Like there's these disjunctions that you actually have to kind of know and have lived. And so like to circle back, like, yes, I think there's a lot of value for having some experience and having some experience around the table. Don't have to have it all on a single threaded individual as a founder. But it definitely doesn't have to be a PhD. I think it's a great way to learn, explore, and learn how to do science and to learn how to do rigorous science and, you know, learn how to test a hypothesis and drive it forward. But, having some experience around the table is like almost needed.
Yeah, I mean, that's super fair. I mean, and I think like what's interesting, we talk a lot in the startup world, and especially with how fast AI is moving and like how hype driven certain things
Yep.
are becoming, is like team composition.
Yeah.
And at what point do you start valuing experience versus not? And I actually love some of these anecdotes that I think we've had some really great entrepreneurs talk about, is like throughout your career, what phases do you go through? Is like earlier a mercenary, and then at the end
Yeah.
of the journey, you're like a visionary and an artist. And so it's like interesting
Yeah.
to put this together to say, maybe someone's disrupting something in health or life sciences that they found, a capturing, but then again, they don't have the experience, and then they could have spent, 5 years running in the wrong direction and building in the wrong way, even if the system is flawed, which is also like a possibility, and probably what some of these younger entrepreneurs from first
Yeah.
principles thinking like, clearly, if I were to
Yeah.
quote unquote zero-based budget or whatever the equivalent is in life sciences, go, bottoms up, is just wrong, but
Yeah.
you need to get things done at the same time. So bringing in
Yeah. I think it's really hard to hit on an interesting point here where it's like from first principles, like we probably wouldn't have designed the thing the way we did it.
yeah,
But that's our state of play right now in the world. And like, where are there places that you have a lever to pull? Like, hey, we can change
yes,
that. How can we tweak this? And maybe there's an unlock that now there is a big disjunction in value, and you can run into that as someone who is like benevolently naive, let's say. Like, oh, that's great. Now you like everyone else is just kind of following the sheep and there's a way around this. On the flip side, like there's places where you're just going to run into a brick wall.
yeah,
And it's really hard to know like when and where those things change.
yeah,
And so like I think it's thinking through this of like incentives across the whole system. I think like the healthcare is an interesting one for this where there's lots of incentives and sometimes they don't necessarily make sense.
yeah,
But like if you're gonna go take food out of someone's mouth, like that's gonna be a really hard thing to convince them to adopt your thing, even if it's great for human health. If it's gonna hit their paycheck, like they're probably not gonna help you out a lot.
right,
I think one interesting example is like, the AI in healthcare right now, where, forever it was just so hard. And like I think Menlo VC just put out a good study on this of like all of a sudden you're seeing this rapid adoption of AI across healthcare, things like scribes and open evidence.
yeah, yeah,
Like these companies are growing like crazy.
yeah,
Now, are those things going to be sticky? Are these going to be the eventual winners? Like, I don't know. But clearly someone who has spent their life in healthcare would have been like, man, those things are never going to get adopted. Like, don't even try. And you had a new generation say, hey, like, let's go try this again and find success. And so like you need that testing continuously, I think.
Well, I wonder, you know, if these technologies get adopted so fast
Yep.
and then they don't work. Like,
Yeah.
which is not the claim. Actually, most technologies you just mentioned, I'm personally bullish on
Yeah.
that, but if they don't, and there's like this massive, because of course where fast growth and exciting returns follow, so does noise.
Yep.
And so if that's the case, and healthcare organizations, there's a reason healthcare moves
Mhm.
slow, and for
Mhm.
some reasons good, right?
Yep.
These are lives at risk, and so you want to have really high confidence interval that something works. And so all these technologies get adopted, and then they're not all are so positive, and someone's better at sales, and so they
Yeah.
were able to break in. And now there's a mass reversion back of like, okay,
It's
let's
hard.
go back and move
I
slow.
really worry
This is
about that.
scary.
I really worry about that,
Yeah.
right? Because you have, I think especially now with some of these like AI models that they actually work really well in kind of the meat of the distribution curve.
Yeah.
Like clearly, like you trained a model to predict in something in like a distribution, and it's like that's great. It's like if it's in the 40th or 50th or 75th percentile, like you're probably gonna nail it pretty well. But these things tend to fall down like out of distribution,
Yeah.
and that's where I worry of like, hey, we're going to, and we're going to see it happen.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to see some AI model or some of these tech tooling do something wrong,
Yeah.
and it's not going to get caught, and it's going to have a real human cost.
Hmm.
And like, what do we benchmark this against? I think there's interesting analogies to like self-driving cars, where you're like, well, self-driving cars are not held to the same standard that a human is held to. You're
As
like,
in
oh,
lower or higher?
higher.
Yeah.
Yeah, self-driving cars is like, yeah, you have to have no chance of killing someone. Like we all know, like driving to work, like there is a real chance that a human behind a wheel causes an accident.
Right.
And that's a really hard thing to grapple with as a society. That like, where do you hold these tech solutions, even if they're better for human health? I think we're going to view them differently. And
Yeah.
I do worry that we're going to have, you know, headlines about, oh, someone has a bad health outcome,
Yeah.
and you even see this with like drugs, where you know we've kind of litigated a society of like, hey, we run a placebo-controlled trial and we can directly compare a person who got the drug versus not, and that's works. But like, that's still imperfect because each group is independent of each other, right? They're different human beings, and that becomes really tough as we start thinking about like an N=1 gene therapy.
Yeah.
Of like, what if something bad happens? Would that have happened to them anyway? Like, it's just a really big challenge, and we need to, I think, be thoughtful and empathetic as an industry. And like the move fast break things, I don't think works particularly well in healthcare because it's so personal to so many people. And like, I do worry that like people who are like marketing first, let's go out there, let's move
Yeah.
really fast. It's like, yeah, but there's a real human cost to these things. It's not like your app broke and everyone churned off your platform. It's like, no, like there's a person out there who had a real cost. And like, that's where you have to kind of tread the line between optimism and wanting to push tech forward and some caution on the other side, because I don't want to see like blood testing, and Theranos is a great example, right? Like there's actually like cool stuff that can be done with like blood testing, but now everyone is like, oh my God,
Cautious.
Theranos every time there's a new blood testing. And like,
Well,
that's been a long time.
they say that, but capital still flows there. Like,
I
this
know.
is kind of
I
interesting. Is
know.
like they say that, but then, but we do see like we've seen a lot of these kinds of close enough examples. This definitely spurs a lot of thoughts, and yeah, I think like the integrate like the across the stack kind of a component. This is like maybe a modern day esque entrepreneur view of like Musk is a good example
Yeah.
of like this is alluding back to kind of your brick wall example
Yeah.
of like maybe first time entrepreneur, second time
Yeah.
entrepreneur building in the space where what is truly a brick wall versus what is something that I can reinvent across pharma, across
Yeah.
drug discovery. And then, of course, you've got somebody like Elon Musk, who's like
Yeah.
the definition of vertical and horizontal integration across all the businesses together. And it's how many of these were like quote unquote real brick walls that were broken. And then, and then this is a hard trade-off is like if you're backing a real, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this as an investor, but if you're backing like a really capable entrepreneur, wouldn't you back the kind of person that breaks these real, these true brick walls that says, well, like pharma's screwed and let's just like reinvent this process, when like that's quite the challenge if you're just a tiny component of this little industry. And so
Yeah.
how do you think about that trade-off when someone comes to you and will speak about these things on like, here's what I can break and here's
Yeah.
what I will follow along in line with and get the right accreditations and processes?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. I mean, I'd love to see Elon Musk say, "I'm going to go do a drug company." Right? I think that'd be a fascinating experiment to do.
Yeah.
I mean, he's getting a little close with Neuralink.
Yeah.
And like, I've been, I would say, surprised at how well some of it has gone. But on the flip side, like, I still have caution about like, you're messing around in people's brains,
Yeah.
and like, you know, almost everything Elon has done today has been like well in the engineering camp.
Yeah.
Of like, if it's within the realm of physical possibility, you can engineer around it. And like, that's a more favorable place to build and try to disrupt than if like biology, where you're like, the rules are actually unknown. And we just like, we can think we know exactly what's going on and say, hey, we're building up first principles. And you go down and you're like, oh yeah, it turns out like that was bad. I remember there was a recent drug combo study.
Mhm.
And it was like, hey, we're gonna take two well-known drugs that both are efficacious. We're gonna put them onto the same patient. I think it was a small n, so you take it with like a little bit of grain of salt.
Yeah.
But it made their cancer much worse. And you're like, oh, I wouldn't have thought that.
Right.
And you can like post hoc, you can go back and be like, oh, like I could see now, I can reconstruct the mechanism for how I would think this could theoretically work.
Yeah.
But like, you don't know that a priori. Like, you have to go and run these experiments, and that's like kind of a wicked learning environment where you don't know the rules. And so I think, to go to your question of like, how do I think about like going to backing, like, call it really ambitious entrepreneurs who are like,
Yeah.
hey, we're going to go really innovate and call it break through some brick walls here, but that's the things I'm not going to touch. Like, I love seeing people be very thoughtful and acknowledge the challenges that are out there.
Yeah.
Like, I think almost every like venture-backed style startup, outside of like the incremental, like, drug development has its own, like, hey, we're going to do the best, XYZ antibody, and that's going to be our billion-dollar outcome, and that's all we're going to shoot for. Like that's not really what I'm talking about here. When you think about how do you build the next like really big like $10 billion plus company, um, I think having crisp vision for like here is why I think that these brick walls are existing, and have that backed up with good reasons, with talking with people who have been there and done that before, um, and then saying like, and here's the clear-eyed view of the things that we aren't going to change, and then here's the reason, and then like laying out the case for it.
Yeah.
I think it's really easy to be glib, like, hey, the whole thing is broken, we're going to reimagine this from first principles, and like I think that can get funding in some quarters. And I think, there's lots of biotech VCs who could be more visionary and more ambitious and fund like bigger breakthrough ideas, because I think there's, things to do in healthcare. But you're always challenged because you can't tackle all these risks at once and reasonably like think you're going to knock down them all. And so like I think it's great to see it laid out and be willing to have an intellectual conversation, with myself or another VC of like, well, here's why I disagree with you, and engage with that, because there's very few startups that are like, from day one, I laid out the vision, it went exactly as planned, and I was unwilling to waver on all my convictions from day one.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like, and then do you want to see, say someone comes to you with all this laid out and like a intellectually sound approach, you want to see action taken here, because you're operating in the early stages, and maybe this is like even beyond the scope of Madrona. Maybe this is just how you think personally, but maybe like in cohesion of both of those, someone that's gone and like taken steps beyond conversations of like, I've reached out to these officials to get X change, and I'm like, I'm so adamant about my thesis here that I'm going to break down this brick wall. Or is it more of like intellectually sound? Now let me bet on you to go out and do this.
I mean, a bias towards action is always great, right? Talk is cheap, right? And like I think that's one of those great like signs of an entrepreneur, when they're like, hey, like I've hustled my way into all these conversations that maybe I don't even have any business getting into.
Right.
Like that's just a phenomenal sign. And like I would say one of the best like green flags early on for an entrepreneur of like, hey, I have a company, or I don't even have a company yet, but like here's 4 people who might be like 20 years my senior, who are willing to join me day one, because like, and you're like, oh wow, this person is a talent magnet. Like the thing to think about from a CEO is like, at the end of the day, you're a salesperson number one. Like you're selling investors, you're selling, regulators, sometimes you're selling people to join your vision. Like if you find people like that who are just talent magnets and out there hustling, like that's just a great sign. I love to see that. Like the bias towards action, especially when it's just like free. Like emails are free, conversations are free, and people generally in the life sciences are very willing to give their time, because we're all trying to generally push human health forward. And so it's like, hey, like why not take an hour out of my time if this person is super compelling?
Are you a health coach or running a health course and looking to level up your client's experience? With Cyphox Health at-home blood test, you can deliver lab-quality blood work right to your client's door. Seamlessly ship samples back for fast and actionable results. Personalize every consult with the data that matters. Clients who complete a Cyphox test are 60% more likely to enroll in a paid program after their consult compared to those who only join a sales call. If you're ready to give your clients the edge, go to cyphoxhealth.com/partner. And as a Silicon Fox podcast listener, enjoy 10% off your first bulk order.
In life sciences, this kind of is an interesting thought process, and maybe this is going to unveil if you have any like unique sourcing mechanisms. But I know that in tech and across a lot of industries, there's cool processes to weeding out superficial basis of talent. And I guess this is kind of academia to some extent, cool thesis, cool professor, great outcome. But like, in tech, you would say, okay, X Palantir or X, and of course, like again, superficial first basis, maybe someone's not capable, really capable, whatever it is. I don't know, from whatever research I've done, there's not necessarily this exact equivalent in life sciences.
I really don't love credentialism. Like I get it, right? Like there's, hey, like, is the Harvard PhD like really categorically like way, way, way better than the PhD from some other university? Like, I don't know, on average.
Well, based on outcomes, I'm actually curious. Like based on outcomes, because
that's always hard though, right? Because like these, the system is set up to fund people with this. So
but this is the point though. Like this brings up an interesting point. Is like if I've got 2 candidates to fund, building in the same space, and one is well more credentialed. Even if there's a delta in like intellectual disparity, if it's true statistically that the one who's well credentialed will more likely to succeed, at the end of the day, you're a venture firm, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess it's also a trade-off. Maybe even I'm curious, like a moral trade-off of altruism and impact in health versus actual success.
Yeah.
Like how do you evaluate these candidates?
I mean, I think that's a really hard question.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's the job though, right? Of like, venture's hard to apply statistics to because it's a power law outcome. And so like you actually don't care what the average outcome is. You care about what the one amazing outcome
Right. That's fair.
every other fund is. And I think the job really would be, hey, go meet the two people. And like your job is choosing between the two. If you're going to make one investment and then you get held to that choice and, maybe 75% of the investors out there choose the more credentialed one and 25% choose the less or whatever the number is. But like there is a true set at the end of the day of who's going to build the more amazing company. I will say the thing that's hard about like credentialism like that, and the reason why it can be powerful is that then that person continues on with that credential. And like, well, now you're, the Harvard PhD who was raised a bunch of money and then you're more likely to be able to hire talent. And so, I think part of the job of a VC is like, if someone doesn't come from a super pedigreed background, can you help bring some of this and de-risking to them? And I think that's like one of the nice things about being at Madrona, of like, especially in the Seattle ecosystem. It's like, great, cool. Like that is a big de-risk to someone who may have a career and a family to go jump and join a startup that's like, hey, by the way, this is backed by a reputable VC. And I think that's something you can bring to the table, even if it's like a little bit superficial.
Yeah.
But I don't love leaning credentials. I'm like, I didn't go to Harvard, right?
No, that's fair. I mean, it's super fair, and completely agree with you. I just think it's an important topic.
There's a great Nassim Taleb like aphorism where it's like, you actually want the doctor who doesn't look like a doctor because he got there because
he's actually
because he's actually unskilled, not just because he looks like a doctor and has the credentials of a doctor. If like when you see someone who's like ground his way to the top and they don't have the background, you're like, wow, they must be really good.
Right. This is a great point. But yeah, of course, compounding is like the eighth wonder of the world, and so there's value. And this is a great point as well. I think Mark Andreessen kind of went out and was maybe one of the earlier people to go out and say this, is like, what is the true value in a venture firm early stage, and why Andreessen Horowitz at least has had such a thesis on like media.
Yeah, they're talking their own book. Like that's Andreessen's whole thing of like, hey, distribution.
Yeah, like you borrow the credibility, and this is and this honestly could get very scary too if you think about it. Right? This like a very ultra credentialed person is trusted. I guess this is like a Theranos example. Like ultra credentialed top investors raise a lot of money. People sideline things.
Notable on Theranos didn't raise any money from traditional like life science or healthcare VCs.
That's true. Okay, that's a good point.
I do think this is one of the things I do like, and it makes it tough in life sciences and in healthcare as well. Of like at the end of the day, like you actually do have a truth set of like, hey, you're going to run a clinical trial, you're going to run a critical experiment, and like you just figure out like, does the drug work?
Does it work or
does
not?
the intervention work? Does your device actually increase human health? And like if it does, you can just like raise off that data. And it's really hard where you're trying to figure out like, oh, is this data really great? Data is always a little bit noisy, but then there's the true set. And it's not like ARR. You're not just seeing like, oh, it ticks up and to the right a little bit. So it's a little bit more like step function jumps. Like, wow, the data looks great. And you see this happen in the public market. Like someone has a drug no one believes in. All of a sudden, they show they can cure something. And you're like, you have a 500% gain in a day in the public market. Like that's crazy. That doesn't happen in tech.
Right. But would you say that this is then different across how models benchmark? Because like if you do a deep dive into how models benchmark and
like AI models,
and like foundation models and like some of these techniques, and of course this, not that this is publicized, of course they're trying to do less of it, but even like the techniques and the training and like in RL and pre and like this whole process and life cycle, it gets pretty gamified.
Oh, it's super
like,
gamified.
But so you can do like a relatively similar, I guess the argument you could be, life science can evaluate, is this trial legit on the clinical side, but it still doesn't answer the question of, is this going to be really useful? Unless maybe you're arguing like drug discovery.
That's an interesting analogy too, because like you can totally game a clinical trial, and you've seen people do that, and like generally speaking, those are less well rewarded in the public markets, and like you've seen drugs get approved and don't get used because it's like no one believes that they work like they really claim they work. But no, I think it's a really good analogy where you certainly can game benchmarks. You can certainly game experiments if you want to. And, I think seeing firsthand, like all these AI models being put into life sciences, our companies see them, they use them, and at the end of the day, they're going to go out and run their own freaking benchmarks. Right. Like, hey, like, AlphaFold and for the protein folding land, like, hey, we're going to try the next one. We're going to try in bolts. We're going to try chai or whatever it is, everyone out there. And like, take out your old model, plug in the new one, test it against your truth set that you know isn't in the training data set because it's like proprietary
course,
to
yeah.
you. Like, did it perform better or worse? And I think the interesting piece of it is like a lot of these new models don't actually benchmark any better. Like, oh, it actually made our whole pipeline worse. And
Yeah.
you're like, cool, like don't use it then. And so like I think that's really important in, you know, any company. Just like run your benchmarks. Like don't assume that whatever model that gets put out by OpenAI or Google is going to make your whole process better. Like you have to have your own testing of this.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't know if people think about that much. And obviously
Benchmark ruthlessly every time, just benchmark.
yeah, and now OpenAI for science, right? There's
Yeah.
like this push. So AlphaFold, this
Yeah.
is like a big one, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you know, we've alluded to AI for drug discovery a bit, and likely just my lack of knowledge here. And I'm curious, like maybe even specific callouts that you have that have really moved the needle here, because AlphaFold, you can obviously argue, was a true step function change, was a true improvement
Amazing.
across a lot of things. And then there's like, you know, a lot of noise right now with just these I think in these bubble, well, I won't call it,
You won't call it a bubble yet.
I won't call it. I won't call it this.
That's
You know,
me.
yeah, we're gonna cause problems here. You know, not these kinds of markets, but just markets that are exciting, move fast.
Mhm.
There's things that have been like called out now that even like on the engineering side is like to some degree not super physics backed. You know, there's like this data centers in space. Right now you've got Max 7 companies doing this, and you've got physicists coming out and saying like, "What are you guys talking about?"
Yeah.
Right? And like now companies are starting to do it, and of course like there's back and forth. And at the same time, and we were just talking before we started recording here, I was like, we've got a lot of new funds investing into this space, like, you know, that are deep tech funds that weren't so, you know, clinical trial based now, because you see a lot of like AI for drug discovery, AI, you know, changes that build on top of AlphaFold or for future of these kinds of things. Is any of this like working yet? Because I'm yet to see any of this, and is like, have we seen enough data points that validate that this is going to work?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple pieces in there. Like, I think just the highest level, like this is an awesome part about capitalism. Like all these people are super smart, right? Like all the VCs are super smart. All the entrepreneurs are super smart. Like people are trying their best. Like there's, you know, a vanishingly few amount of people out there who are like, oh, I'm going to try to scam people. I'm going to try to go do a quick flip and get rich. Like VC and entrepreneurship are like terrible ways to get rich. Like, you want to go rich, like go work at Facebook or
go start a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. But like all these people are trying really hard, and like people are voting with their dollars. And we're running this massive experiment across what is actually like objectively a very exciting revolution.
Yeah.
Like whether it's a bubble or not, like I don't really care. I think what we're going to see is in 20 years, you're going to see AI spread out across the entire economy. Like, do I know like where the giant spikes are going to be that like, oh, there's no more people who are employed in this industry because AI took over all their things, versus where it's like, oh my God, these people are super powered because they have a AI assistant right next to them at all times. Like, I don't fully know that, but I mean, I have my guesses.
Yeah.
But like, it's going to be everywhere, right?
But
we're going to have
specifically,
AI
like-
in your inbox. You're going to have AI in your doctor's office. You can have AI in your drug development, and it's going to be almost everywhere. And so in the long run, like it's clearly a step function change in how we deal with, you know, everyday life, especially like around things like languages, because like the language models work really well and are scaling really well. In terms of the funds, like, yeah, there's some crazy things out there. And the hardest part about this is like some of them are going to be right. And some of them are just going to be like catastrophically wrong and hilariously so, that people will like look back with 2020 hindsight and be like, what idiots? Who would have ever given them money? But like, that's the thing. Like,
confirmation bias, of course.
yeah, exactly. It's really easy to look in the rearview mirror and say, oh, that's the way it always was preordained to be.
Yeah.
But like, there's going to be some crazy ones that you're like, wow, I didn't think that was going to work. And that person was a visionary. And like, cool. That's why we run the experiment. That's why we run this giant like capitalist experiment of try all these cool things. And some of them are going to stick and say all the naysayers were just so wrong. I guess the cool part about it.
In drug discovery, I guess like what I'm trying to get at is from like a less macro dollars invested AI involvement, but a ground up. Are we seeing differences with AI being applied to drug discovery that are moving the needle? It doesn't even. I'm not asking. Like,
categorically, yes, right? Like I think you get sometimes a like view of people being like, oh, it doesn't solve all the problems, therefore I have skepticism like broadly. Like go talk inside of like any pharma and they're like, of course, we've been doing AI for 10 years, right? There's a whole bunch of tools that are already implemented inside of pharma that like, why would you ever not use the tool? Like, I think the best analogy that I like here is for DNA sequencing, like NGS.
Yeah.
There was this huge genomics boom a while ago now, like probably like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, we're going to sequence the human genome. We're going to solve all of human disease because it's all driven by our genome, and this is going to solve drug development. Like, that just didn't happen, right?
Right.
A lot of those companies blew up. Some of them are still around and iconic. But nowadays, DNA sequencing is the best data generation engine that we have in life sciences. It undergirds almost every single company out there because you can test proteins with it, you can test RNA, you can test DNA, you can sequence whole swaths of the population. Like, it is just a tool that no one would give up for any amount of money because it powers modern day drug development. I think that's what exactly going to see with AI, where
Fair.
like when I was, my lab was actually right next to David Baker's. And so it was like, I had a front row seat to this. It was amazing. And like in my PhD, I found this protein. I was like, I wonder what it looks like, right? It was some C. elegans protein. There was no way I could understand. You're like, okay, well, maybe if I moved over to David's lab and did my PhD, I could solve the structure for this because we didn't have an AlphaFold like tool yet.
Yeah.
Like, now it's like trivial. I just throw it in. 15 minutes later, it pops out. I was like, hey, here's what your protein looks like. And like, that's kind of incredible. Like, and now you have scientists at their fingertips. Of course they're doing it. Of course you're like, why wouldn't I try to figure out all of the protein structures that I care about for a trivial amount of time and a trivial amount of cost? And so you're seeing these things get layered in across virtually every type of life science company. You're going to solve proteins with AlphaFold. You have small molecule AI models. We can know how these things both bind to targets, but also sample a broader target space. There's more small molecule structures than there are atoms in the universe. Like, you can't sample that. So you need to have these tools to say, hey, let's downsample that space to like these drug-like islands. You have people going out there and saying, hey, like, that's great that we can solve known structures and develop drugs against them. What happens when I want to solve other unknown structures and use that as a new axis for drug development? We have one of our companies doing that right now, and they're like, the idea is we're currently restricted in geometry space, largely in our protein biologic drugs. And so if we can expand that with de novo design proteins, you open up a whole new way to target known receptors and known proteins. And you're like,
That's cool.
like that couldn't happen without generative protein design.
Yeah.
And so like, you're going to see lots of, I think, day-to-day known processes made better by enabling with that. And you'll see a handful of places where you have something that is completely impossible before you start layering these tools, and now you can unlock it and suddenly like, oh, now we have a new way to drug X, Y, or Z. And like, I'm excited about both of them, and I think we're going to see both of them.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's super exciting. Like, that's exciting that there's companies like that building the space. What do you think is the next step function change beyond AlphaFold that we're going to see in the next few years that gets you like excited and you scientifically think is sound?
That's a good question. I think that the turn has to be, how do we start understanding things that are a click deeper into drug development, not just drug discovery.
Okay.
Like, you can go find a whole bunch of binders nowadays, and like, binding doesn't equal a drug.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of other things that go into it, like how stable is it in your body? How easy is it to make? Is your body going to have an immune reaction when you inject these things? Those are really hard data sets to get. I think like theoretically, like, the data probably exists if you like glom together every data set that every farm has ever generated, and you can't even do that because the data is not like cleaned and available in these companies.
Nobody's going to do it.
No one can do it. Everyone doesn't have incentive to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, in my eyes, kind of murky if we can even make these models like really performant today. But I think we can get some little bits of performance here and there for things like immunogenicity or toxicity, and then start building this and bootstrapping this to make it better. And so, I think we're kind of there with finding binders and finding like the earliest stages of drug development. Like, I think there's a lot of companies to be built there, and I think it's very interesting, and we're still looking at that. But what's going to be the true unlock would be like, hey, now we're going to take those binders that we're interested in, we think have instrument properties, and now say, what do the rest of the drug development lifecycle look like? Because what we need to do as an industry is go from 10% success rate of, hey, starting this drug development journey to what actually gets approved. And we don't have to move it to 100, but if we can move it to 25%, like, you just change the math of drug development, and then suddenly this is a different looking industry. I think that's where I think we can get, and that's like the hope for the whole industry. And like, I think the AI tooling, and I use tooling very specifically there, is a great way to start chipping away at this. It's not going to be like one tool, you turn the key and suddenly you fix everything. But if you can say, hey, we actually understand, the biology a little bit better. We understand, hey, this data set from non-human primates plus mice plus maybe some organoid data, like, they all have pieces of the truth of biology in them. If we can understand, hey, like, we need to hit all these different model systems in this way to have a 80% chance of a success hitting this disease, then like you kind of win. That's what we need to do.
I want to talk about a staple in my routine. I've been using creatine for years, not just when I'm trying to hit a PR in the gym, but because it's foundational for how my body recovers and how my brain operates under fatigue. The hardest part about supplementation is knowing what to take. It's actually taking it. Consistency is the only thing that matters. If you miss a day because you're traveling or because mixing a powder is a hassle when you're running out the door, you lose some of the benefit. That's why I'm all in on the new creatine chews from Momentous. I've started using these daily, and the convenience is a game changer. I notice that when I'm consistent with these, my recovery between workouts is faster, and I don't get that mental fog late in the day. Creatine isn't just for building muscle. It's become a daily essential for your strength, focus, recovery, aging, and cognitive performance. And now, Momentous is making your daily creatine routine even easier with new creatine chews. Each chew delivers exactly 1 gram of Creapure creatine monohydrate, the gold standard, single source from Germany and NSF certified for sport. It's trusted by Olympic athletes, pro sports teams, and elite military operators. You know exactly what you're putting into your body. Whether you're training, working, or traveling, this is performance without pause, made to support your body and your brain every single day. Right now, Momentous is offering our listeners up to 35% off your first order with promo code SiliconFox. Go to livemomentous.com and use promo code SiliconFox for up to 35% off your first order. That's livemomentous.com, promo code SiliconFox.
On this point of the fact that, like, yes, no one's incentivized to aggregate this data,
Mhm.
which makes it difficult to create this change. Probably, and maybe this is my speculation, but probably who's best and most well suited to build this are the companies with the most resources and like the
Mhm.
most advanced AI modeling on that side of it, which kind of leads to the fact is like this. We again probably brought it up before we started recording here. Is like this OpenAI for science. Where do you think these companies start to play into this stack?
Yeah.
And like, where does it get really application layered versus
Mhm.
foundational layered,
Yep.
and where do resources play a large role? Because obviously, you know, these more advanced companies that are well, you know, maybe not well credentialed, but
Mhm.
have proven themselves in this space can go out to raise capital, but can they raise like OpenAI can raise? And then like if OpenAI goes out and builds this like specific subunit,
Mhm.
and I don't want to speculate that far of like,
Yeah.
oh, they, you know,
Yeah.
I'm not, I don't want to go too far out
Mhm.
here. I want to be pretty realistic, but they're one of the better positioned
Mm.
people to aggregate this data
Mhm.
and now build the
Yeah.
application layer. How do you
Yeah.
think about that as an investor?
I don't think that the winner will be an OpenAI or a Google or an Anthropic in the space. Like, I think they will have some interesting tooling out there, and I think that they will put out some interesting models. But the industry, I think, will be the industry depth and knowledge and trust will be required. And so, like, I think it's probably a better bet to say it's either going to be something like, Lilly Toon Labs is really interesting to me of them saying, hey, we're going to act as more of a neutral arbiter and let people have access to our models, without seeing our data. And, we're not going to see their data, but can we come together and make a better system together? There is consortia which have come together before. I think I could see a model where maybe it's a nonprofit or some other company is able to convince pharma to come together and make a
Oh,
better model
interesting.
because
Yeah.
good for everyone. So I think OpenFold has done this as its competitor to AlphaFold and all the other protein models, saying, hey, like all these pharma companies have internal protein structure databases, kind of similar to what the protein data bank is. Like if they have data and you can combine it with the public data, you actually end up with a better model at the end of the day. And it might be more focused to the individual targets pharma cares about. Like that seems like a good thing for all of drug development. Like you've seen people come together. There was an open AdMet for drug-like properties. I don't think it performed great, but it's nice to see some people being willing to say, hey, like let's come together, let's bring the data. And I think there has to be a turn of sophistication of how like these things get done. And maybe it is a joint public-private thing where, hey, the NIH or something funds mass data generation, gives incentive to pharma to come to it, come to the table and give their data. But we have to be intelligent how we can like do it like a federated learning like approach where people are incentivized to not only give data, but the good data. And the more high quality data you give, the better access to the model you get. Like I think
Sure.
there's clever ways to incentivize companies to do this. I don't think people like should be expected to be altruistic in this,
Yeah.
but can we set up an incentive system that says, hey, like we should actually be all pooling our data because the industry will be better for this. And so like I think it's going to be an industry like focus thing, whether it's a startup or a pharma company that enables this, or like, I don't really know.
Yeah.
But I just don't see OpenAI or Anthropic having enough focus in this particular subset of industry to be like the eventual winner of this.
Do you think what is public sector doing here now
Not
today?
enough.
Yeah. But this
I
is
mean,
like a lack of agency, lack of intellectual, like
I think it's a
force.
lack. I think it's a lack of funding. I think it's a lack of focus. It's not really in the remit of an individual agency to say like I'm going to just fund a bunch of like data generation for data generation's sake. We've done this.
ARPA-H
We've done this
kind
in
of,
a
no?
couple. Yeah, we've done this in a couple spaces.
Yeah.
And it's just really hard to do. Like individual labs have their own batch effects, and like one lab's data doesn't look like the next lab's data because of all sorts of like technical reasons.
Yeah.
And so it's just really hard, like technically, to say, hey, we're going to try to pull this off. But I think it's doable. Like it's an engineering problem, not a biology problem.
Yeah.
I also do wonder if there's like, some government pull that's a little easier for a government to say like, hey, Pfizer, hey, pharma company, like if you want approval, you need to, give us some of the data back to a neutral entity that's never going to develop its own drugs, right? Like you always worry about like, hey, how do you do the like incentives if you're going to eventually be a competitor with someone who you're trusting? Like
Of course,
having
yeah.
a neutral entity is like a really big value here. That's like, hey, we're never going to develop drugs.
Can we do this
We're
today or
only a
no?
provider. We've done, it's been done in places.
Okay.
Right? Like, so one good example that is at scale is like the ENCODE project, which is like largely around genomes, and people will sequence lots of different genomes and sequence different like epigenetic marks or whatnot and put these into a database, and you can search the database, and you can talk to any scientist who has been there and done that, and then be like, oh yeah, ENCODE's great. Also, like I freaking hate dealing with ENCODE.
Yeah.
One of our CEOs of one of our companies did a big initiative of this with like RNA sequencing data, and he was kind of the leader in the field for saying, hey, I'm going to take the public data in, but I'm going to curate it and clean it and make it much more functional for people to use and do their analysis on as individual labs. And now he's kind of spun this out into a company, and hey, we're going to do this at a bigger scale and build a foundation model around this RNA-seq data. And like, things like that. And like, they're not going to be a drug development organization. They're going to be a foundation model provider in RNA-seq. And so like, that's an easier thing for a pharma company to work with you. Like, well, you're never going to be a competitor. You're only a service provider.
Enabler, yeah.
And so like, that's an easier sale than saying like, hey, please work with us. Also, like, we're going to be a competitor with you in 4 to 5 years.
Who do you think in the life science space though is pushing the needle here? Like, I think we've chatted with a lot of these organizations recently, and because this to me it's like googly eyed and fresh. It's like kind of exciting, and then
it is exciting.
Obviously, when I talk to people, they're like, but they're not actually doing some of this, and so like across whoever it is, NIH, DARPA, ARPA-H, and ARPA-H is new, right? So Are you bullish on this? Like, what's been happening? What gets you excited as an investor?
I mean, I think I'm relatively bullish across it all, right? Like, I want to see attention money flow to this.
Because I've heard actually a lot of, like, from an investor perspective, as of recent, a lot of negative feedback on SBIR, saying like, and you're going to get pushed in this direction, and just like, this is not enough money to matter. And just a lot of investors, that we've chatted with is just like, on the healthcare side, SBIR, they're not excited. Yeah. And so how do you think about that?
I mean, depends where you are in your journey, right? Like, if you've raised $20 or $30 million, like an SBIR probably isn't worth your time. Just like, it's just not the scale of capital you need. And maybe if it's already in line with something you've done, like, sure. But also, like, I think you need to be talking to people who were pre-VC about SBIR. Like, how do you get an ambitious idea off the ground with, a tiny little of angel money, or convince people this is real? Like, that's where I see SBIR as really catalytic.
Got it.
It's like, how is a grad student going to get enough money to kind of run the one killer experiment that proves that his crazy idea is true? Like, great, like, go try to get an SBIR. But no, I mean, I'm relatively bullish across all these things because, like, I want attention, I want money flowing to the sector, because, like, there are counterintuitive things that are just true, and there are things that should be funded by non-dilutive resources and not like highly dilutive VC dollars. I don't think a lot of like moonshots should necessarily be funded by VC. I think it's like a place for a government to step in and do some fundamental basic science research. Like there's the kind of adage like, oh, the NIH funds all this drug development. You're like, well, they fund a lot of fundamental basic science research that unlocks drug development for the industry to do. But like Lilly just published or just was talking about the scale of R&D that they're invested in. Like, they invest more R&D than Germany. And you're like, okay, so like somehow...
They're also the first $1 trillion...
They are also the first $1 trillion life science company, which is exciting.
Very exciting for the sector. How do you think about like novelty versus application and like
Mm.
reproduction, if that makes sense. Like in this space, I'm just excited to even hear this. Like this is very exciting and new and exciting, but it's new. And so then like the first question becomes is like durability. And this kind of will segue into some of the questions we were talking about beforehand. And like what does it really take to build a durable business versus the novel? And like this is maybe even like a macro VC topic of like first mover, and how do you think about that, as specifically in life sciences? Like how valuable is that when a lot of this per se isn't patentable or isn't defensible outside of like data, capital, etc.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we do have a coin of the realm in life sciences, like composition of matter patents. And you say, hey, like I found a drug and it cures X, and you get a patent around the exact molecule.
Yeah.
And like, we've at least so far have the kind of like, social promise that we won't copy that drug for, like, well, now it's like what, 9 or 12 years depending on the type of drug it is, which I think is, we'll see if that sticks around with the IRA saying small molecules have less like IP protection than a biologic, or less exclusivity than a biologic. But I think that's a good question.
Yeah, because like the reason it's important to think about is outside of venture, but even like in the life science ecosystem, look, great CEOs are great storytellers.
Yes.
I could be sold a novel idea.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But then like this forecasting, and we even said this, is like everybody's got a plan, then does it ever go that way? Like for sure, it's like they're building the relative direction and this is difficult.
Yeah.
But then when we don't think from day one, like, okay, if this whole vision works out, how does it become reproducible? How does it work at scale? And of course, these questions get asked.
Yeah. So I guess maybe I'll talk my own book a little bit here. Like, I'm more excited by novelty.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think there is actually a way to make like pseudo venture style returns, saying, hey, I'm not going to go after the peak of novelty. I'm going to go after a good execution insight. And like maybe in life sciences, this looks like, hey, there's a known target and there's a drug that's approved there, and we can get better dosing, or we can get, slightly longer durability. And like you'll see cancer drugs get approved and they're like, oh, you went from, 4-month, survival to like 9-month survival. And like, on one hand, like that's like you're more than doubling the survival. Like that's fantastic. And I think that drugs should be approved and those people should be rewarded. On the flip side, like I'm more excited about things that like truly move the needle. If you look at things like cell therapy, where suddenly you're curing incurable childhood diseases, like that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. And I think we have a real good chance as an industry to have that story happen more frequently because of all the tooling, and not just like AI tooling or whatever, but we've gotten really good at pushing the bounds of just how much a individual researcher can generate and how productive they can be.
Yeah.
And so I'm broadly more excited about having a really strong why now of we are unlocked something categorically new that is going to unlock a new target that is going to cure X, Y, or Z disease. I think, as an industry, it's been a challenge because there are things that I think are really, really great to drive human health that maybe have been challenged to do commercially. Things like antibiotics, things like vaccines. And we're seeing like actually exciting vaccine acquisitions for like RSV and things like that. So it's like, hey, they still are, rewarded. But, that's where I like taking a lot of my attention of like, and then where's the mix of, hey, the vision is novel enough and it's a vision big enough, but there's a grain or two of actuality. I believe you can do that. Because a lot of people will say, hey, like we're going to, cure cancer with X, Y, or Z, or we're going to cure Alzheimer's with X, Y, or Z. And it's like, yeah, everyone wants to do those big things, but the bigger visions are just harder. And a lot of times I just I'm not a believer that, the way you're going about it is going to be the thing that tips it. And like, that's, again, the job of, everyone wants to cure these diseases. It's not like, anyone is a big fan of cancer. But it's just a really hard problem. And so you're like, okay, like where is I think that the time is now to build a truly novel solution. And like the person who has the vision to go do that and the tenacity to go do it too, because like any of these things are going to be really, really hard. If it was easy, someone probably would have done it already.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, but yeah, and there's probably like social / scientific stigmas behind like the statement of like, I want to cure cancer has been like exciting for people to just think about and deal with. There's definitely, now I get to talk about my, what I, this continuous monitoring that we were discussing. pushing the needle here and
Mhm.
building durable versus novel businesses that have true step function changes is
Yeah.
difficult,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
How are you thinking in whichever companies, you know,
Mhm.
if we get too granular and you don't want to talk about them,
Yeah.
we can push off. But
Yeah.
some of these new companies coming out that are building on top of existing infrastructure, and I don't know, would you actually call that part of life sciences? Just before I like kind of dive into that, like, is that something that you think
I mean,
about?
it's kind of semantics, right?
Okay.
Like at a certain point, like all these things blend together.
Yeah.
Like I'll put it in my life science bucket for this conversation. Why not?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So then, like, I'm curious because when you look at it one way, you know, let's talk,
Mhm.
you know, or at home, or you know,
Mhm.
these lab companies that
Yep.
are coming out, Function Health, right? You know, just raised
Mhm.
large valuation.
Massive.
Um, and from a scientific perspective, you probably sit and think is like, okay, you know, LabCorp classes existed. You know, what are you really doing? Like
Yeah.
uploading it
Your
to
thin wrapper around
your thin wrapper around this
Quest.
thing. And then like I was thinking about this for a very long time. Is like, okay, I'm newer to this whole
Mhm.
world, and so like I'm really trying to understand like
Mhm.
what is noise, what is not, what is truth. It seems to be growing so fast.
Yeah.
There's like a clear excitement. It's like what is
Mhm.
going on here? And then an argument was made to me, and I actually started to kind of put together maybe a semi-novel argument here. Is like this is kind of what we're talking about with distribution. Of course, reimbursement is one method of distribution, but here is like you're starting to own user data. One, two.
Mhm.
I constantly have a lot of negative things to say about certain wearables.
Yeah.
And wearables is like they use PPG technology, it's
Mhm.
photonics, it's like, you know,
Mhm.
this is a derived measure of heart rate,
Mhm.
which then derives your
Mhm.
sleep and whatever. And this is like, this is not serious. And it won't, and like, it doesn't really push the needle. It doesn't give you anything actionable. It can't.
Mhm.
But what it did do, outside of some people give anxiety to look at the sleep score in the morning, but
Yeah.
some people, it actually made them start thinking about sleep. So somebody, you know, this interesting point on a macro level is like, as an investor who's bullish on life sciences, period, moving forward, looking at a company like Function saying, you know what, well, now you've got a mass population saying, oh, actually, this seems exciting to me because, you know, we even talked about marketing first. Like that's problematic in life sciences. But where the positive is, one could argue, is like people are now acknowledge of it right now. So you've got a mass database of people that say, okay, well, now I know because through marketing techniques, which is
Yeah.
not positive, but through marketing techniques, I now know to get my blood
Mhm.
labs every 6 months and
Yeah.
so forth. This is positive. How do you
Yeah.
think about like when you invest these kinds of
Yeah.
businesses?
I mean, you make an interesting point about the marketing thing because, like, I think it cuts both ways, right? Of like, people need to know that I have these options, right? And I feel like pharmaceutical advertisements are an example here, where people like
Yeah.
love hating on them.
Yeah,
On the
yeah.
flip side, like, you know, you develop a drug, you have to sell it, like you have to know, like, give people the information that like this is out there. Like, I'm kind of agnostic on them either way, but I don't think it's like panacea or like I don't think it's across the board bad to say, hey,
Yeah.
like marketing in any of these things, like at the end of the day, it's like, are you driving good health outcomes for people? And if you are, then more people should be using it.
Yeah.
And if that's marketing, great, like go do that.
The argument is like if it's marginal,
Yeah,
and like
totally.
the cost that's
Exactly.
happening,
Yes.
it's like marginal improvements for this crazy cost,
Exactly.
and it's a lot of noise, and like
Exactly.
most
Yeah.
people using it don't
Yeah.
need it.
Yeah. But I think the interesting kind you're poking around here is like, I think we're actually entering a really interesting time for like the personalization of healthcare
Yeah.
and getting people outside of like the traditional, like, oh, I go to my doctor, they tell me what to do, and then I go do that. Like, we're starting to get to the point where now we have all this new data and like it's still early days, and so I can't like necessarily know how it's all going to work out, but like my biometrics plus like my lifestyle plus like, you know, the future I want to have looks very different from everyone else. And so like how do I wrap that into like what do I want to do in the near term to drive my own healthcare? And I think we're entering an interesting point. Like you mentioned, function health. It was like, oh, we're going to give you what is it, like 500 biomarkers ever, and like that's just like information overload for like the vast majority of people. But like theoretically now I can take that, like just shove it into Chat GPT and be like, go chat with it. And if I don't understand it, be like, well, explain it to me like a 5-year-old, and
Yeah.
it will do that. And I think that kind of dynamic is really interesting, where now it's like I can go and almost self-diagnose myself. And like, you know, people have like tossed out the term like AI doctor.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, I don't know if that's really the right terminology, but like now I have a relatively smart like thing I can chat with that will help me decipher all this stuff. And so then you say like, well, function health, like that's not really the best, like, or the optimal way to deliver it today.
Well, I don't know.
But
That's
no,
not the
I,
thing
like
nowadays. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question. I was like, hey, like maybe it's continuous, maybe it's, you know, a bigger panel of biomarkers, maybe it's a less panel of biomarkers. But I'm excited that people are trying this stuff out, and I think like you're gonna see a lot of experimentation going on. You're already seeing a lot of experimentation on. Like, go have lunch and people will be wearing they're wearing a Whoop and a Oura Ring, and they have their 8 Sleep at home, and like all like the hot like VC-backed companies, like, you know, vast majority of those are probably not going to be like the winning thing at the end of the day, sad to say, but like maybe it's the second follower, maybe it is like some like version of a quarterly blood test plus a wearable that says, hey, these are the 2 or 3 things you need to check every day to drive real health outcomes, and then delivering those personalization for that person, I think is going to be the winner. Of like, you can't overwhelm someone with like, here's your 100 checklist things to get back to optimal health. You're like, well, no one does that. It's just kind of cutting against human nature. It's like, hey, like, you know, you're not sleeping well, therefore, like, do you want to try melatonin? Do you want to try like eating earlier? Do you want to try cutting out, you know, alcohol or caffeine or whatever it is? But like, what are these like 2 or 3 little things that are going to be the actual actionable things to drive that person into a better health state? Like, that's where I'm kind of excited. And like, you know, I think we're getting there slowly but surely as an industry.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Where maybe this is like my, you know, maybe I'll come off as like an authoritarian. This is like, this assumes the majority of the population is pretty rational and capable of looking at this data and taking action. Now, we live in a world where we can make the argument that this goes all the way to the degree of like, a Neuralink in your brain that says, okay, this is like, don't drink wine now because you're going to sleep bad. Okay, fine, right? This is an extreme. And at this point, you start arguing like, are we humans or are we not? So let's take it a step back to where we are today is like, if I have all this data, even if I have actionable takeaways, one, how actionable are they, right? 100-person checklist, I'm not going to do it. But even today is like, look at what happened with GLP-1s, right? Like GLP-1s became a really big thing. Why? Because to some degree, people don't want to go to the gym, and like people that like
they want the easy pill.
Exactly, it's an easy pill. None of what the action that's recommended is going to be an easy pill. It's still an action, right? Unless it's being done on your behalf. Don't drink X means you have to take the conscientious decision to don't drink X.
See, this is where I might I think that there's interesting tech solutions. Like, man, can't we just hire like some engineers from like Duolingo and like TikTok and be like, man, we've actually gotten really good in the tech world at like gamifying and pushing people to do like what would actually be kind of a weird thing. Like, no one wants to go and like learn Spanish, right? And actually, like, the funny thing about Duolingo is like, you're actually like terrible at learning Spanish. Like, it doesn't work. It's like totally a game, but you're like, we've gamified so many of these interactions. Like, man, we can totally gamify a few little things a day and be like, by the way, we're now like pushing you over to a more healthy like activity. And like, I'm gonna go, like, if I'm sitting in the space, like, man, I'm hiring some TikTok engineers, I'm hiring some from Duolingo, be like, let's go gamify this. Let's go. And like, maybe not all those games are directly on your thing, but you're gonna put in like little things to like, you know, like what the term of art is, nudge. I think the other one that I think is interesting broadly here is like, you know, the smoking cessation apps, right? That was a thing a while ago. And because you can like draw the economic case for like, hey, we're going to pay, you know, an applicate app or whatever it is, like $1,000, and you're going to drive like 10% of my employee base to stop smoking. That's going to save me healthcare costs in both the short run and the long run, and it's good for them. Like, wait, this is good for everything. Like, is there not like an employer-based, like, hey, you know, like I was at a big corporation for a little bit, and they're like, hey, we'll give you $50 to go do this blood test. I'm like, hell yeah, I want $50. Like, I'll do the blood test. And they're like, hey, like, go sit on an hour, like, call with your financial advisor, like, you know, the corporate financial advisor, talk about your retirement. We'll pay you $25. Like, I don't really need to go sit on an hour call, but like, I'll take $25. And so like, you can actually like bribe and control and gamify some of these outcomes. Like, I think the GLP-1s are a really interesting example. Like, you know, you go to these longevity, like, oh, how can we increase longevity? I'm like, I guarantee you put like 2/3 of America who are overweight onto GLP-1s, you're going to increase their lifespan. Like, GLP-1s are going to increase lifespan. They're going to increase health span of people. Like, you know, are we just going to put this stuff in the water supply? Like, that's kind of crazy, but it like actually would probably like change the trajectory of human health.
I mean, this does centralize power a bit, right? Like, now who decides that this is actually net positive? And like, because there's some a little bit of controversy in GLP-1s.
I met a company once that was like, we're going to put GLP-1s in lettuce and just like give it to the populace. Like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard.
But obesity. Okay,
but then you're like, oh, you have your McDonald's burger, and then you're like, GLP-1s, you stop eating. It's great.
Interesting. This is fascinating. And what's interesting on that point, on the employer side, I didn't think about this, and probably because I haven't worked in as many large corporations, because we had a friend try building a company in like the smoking addiction
Yeah.
space, and it was like the economics don't work. Like you're building a business for somebody to stop using your business,
Yes.
and so this is like an incentive.
But but then it's like whose incentive it is? It's the healthcare system, it's the employers, people who
want
are
to
carrying the risk,
like a value-based care model.
Yeah.
Okay, but so in this world though,
Mhm.
we cannot have much noise in the foundational data that's making the gamified portion. It's like the gamification is fair, but this assumes that the foundation is
Totally.
true. And what's hard here is like I've brought this up in some of the episode. I'm going to sound like a broken record,
Love
but
it.
like when you look at whole genome
Mhm.
with blood,
Yep.
with wearables
Yep.
across the stack, we haven't done data science across these.
Oh, it's so bad. Yeah.
This is like a novel thing. So if I go to upload, my whole genome
Yep.
with my Cyphox Labs,
Yep.
with my Aura data, like I mean, I'd be pretty scared what it's going to tell me because
Yeah,
like
I
we
don't
haven't
know
done
if that's useful, right?
right. So then like what actually happens? So we are still kind of in a build phase then.
We are.
But this is a very interesting view. Is like if we can build a strong data science approach here,
Yep.
and then gamify
Yep.
it, that's actually
Yeah.
fascinating.
And one of my concerns in the space here is like we build from what we have and what we can do as opposed to like what we need to do.
Yeah.
And like, I think things like glucose monitor is an interesting one.
Yeah.
But I think the data, and like, please correct me, you're probably deeper in space than me, around people who are not like pre-diabetic or diabetic, by like measuring your glucose, you're like, it's some iffy like ROI about like, oh my God, I ate a muffin and it spiked my blood glucose and I'm going to freak out about that. You're like, that's probably not the best thing.
You also don't need a glucose monitor to tell you that, It's
Exactly.
Like,
I know it's going to happen. But that's like, okay, I don't know if you need your whole genome to sequence to like tell some of the stuff, but like there's a couple of things that are really interesting, right? There is individual SNPs. Like, I don't think you need a whole genome for it. I think like the 23andMe, like large, like SNP chips, where you do individual polymorphisms. Like, hey, we know you're at risk for breast cancer. Go get it screened. We know you're at risk for blood or your high blood pressure. Like, go test that more often. Like that, I think is actionable. And so there's individual little spikes of signal there. And then that like probably dictates of like, hey, should you be looking for breast cancer earlier if you're predisposed for it? Should like, should you be monitoring your blood pressure or your cholesterol more deeply? Like, should you go have like, there's the free cholesterol panel you get in your physical a year, and then there's like the $1,000 panel that's like, oh, we're gonna do all the fancy cholesterol stuff. And like, if you're predisposed to some of the stuff, like, dude, that $1,000 is like totally worth it to do. Because maybe you should go on statins when you're like 25. One of my best friends like almost died of a heart attack in his mid-30s because he had like hypercholesterolemia. And you're like, wow, I really wish like he would have known that. And like, is there some signal between better testing and genomics that would have given us the insight? Like, yes, and that would have saved the healthcare system money. It would have saved him a lot of challenges. Like, there is like low-hanging fruit here. I just worry that we're saying, hey, like, here's the things we can measure. Let's measure all of them and figure out what we can do with it, as opposed to being like, where are the things that are truly going to change the trajectory? And like, let's go pick the low-hanging fruit, apply those more broadly, and maybe just like sub-segments of the population and go from there. And maybe this is like, maybe it starts with whole genome and then you say, hey, like, you're gonna get subsectored from there for your risks. Or it's genome plus like your lifestyle of like, are you a ultra marathoner or are you like living a sedentary lifestyle and have a BMI of 40? Like, those people are probably really different. Right. And so they should have kind of different interactions with this, personalized healthcare as like a giant umbrella. Where I'm kind of bullish here, I think, is like vertical specific kind of healthcare interventions of like the overweight population should probably have kind of a different interaction with the healthcare system than the athlete. I'm like being hyper focused on my performance because they're going to want to interact with it differently. They're going to need different things. And so like, maybe it looks like, verticalized health insurance, if we ever get away from this like employer-based health insurance thing. Maybe it looks like, a subsegment of like the like large healthcare system saying, hey, we're going to actually tailor this portion of our like workflows to these individuals based on kind of what they have. But I think the verticalized makes a lot of sense to me, and I kind of hope we move that way, because that then allows people to interact with healthcare like they want to, but also give them a turn of personalization, which I think will drive better outcomes in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously like this kind of trade-off in the input versus output category. And I guess what's hard about it is like we do have a lot of conversations with value-based care, especially like the kidney side, value-based kidney care. And it's like what's so hard to convince is
we're not there on value-based care yet either.
Yeah, like how it's so hard to convince somebody that this upfront cost of this testing is going to save money 3 years down the road when it hasn't happened before. And it's like you still don't know
It's so hard. And like, I just don't know. It's really hard for like an investor to like, oh, bet like, hey, that's the future that has to exist for this company to succeed. Like, man, that's a tough bet to take in like
Yeah.
value-based care in particular.
Yeah. And then because even like one thing that I've put together from a lot of these conversations that's been so fascinating, so useful for me on a day-to-day is like value-based care from a altruistic theoretical perspective sounds amazing, but then like a lot of things that like fundamentals we negate is not even like economics or like output of the technologies, but even like first principles of like med school all the way going up to like, well, everybody has to practice in a value-based care mechanism, so like you have to recommend that somebody goes to work out rather than take a pill, and that's like a whole change. Like it seems simple to having this conversation, but
You're just hitting on like why healthcare is really hard, right?
Yeah.
And like I think tying this back to like, hey, how do you think about entrepreneurs and we're gonna change everything? Like if you don't come into like building healthcare with like your first like bullet point being like building healthcare is really hard, like you're probably just gonna be like sign up for a lot of pain you don't need to.
But what I'm so bullish on, this is like a tangent, but
Yeah.
we'll get back to it. Is like, I'm seeing a big wave of course, this AI, boom. There's a lot of people building in B2B SaaS and whatever else, but there's also like just such a massive wave of young people building in defense, health,
Yeah.
climate, like infrastructurally super important industries
Yeah.
because they're like just very bullish in America, very bullish on like health, safety, etc. And it's fascinating. and
You should be
exciting.
bullish. I think it's it's really easy to look at all the things that are wrong in the world and be negative. And like, I think I'm as bullish as I ever have been. Like,
Yeah.
I think there's a great generation of founders coming up that
Great.
it's easier to build than ever before. And like, they're taking big, ambitious visions. So I'm
Yeah.
super bullish.
Yeah. So wait, on this personalized, where I was hoping to get to is like, I kind of alluded to this question before, but in a personalized healthcare world, how do you think about delivery? Because this is probably the biggest challenge
Mhm.
is, okay, today probably we can put together a room of scientists and find out the perfect drug for me.
Yeah.
How can we do that on a supply chain basis at scale and a manufacturing basis at scale? This is almost
Yeah.
impossible to the degree where it's probably not even worth it, right? Unless we come hyper optimized and we do what like, Uber did for transportation, but this is like,
You're hitting on a huge problem. And like, you don't even need to worry about like, hey, how do you manufacture? How do you do like some of the more like granular in the weeds things? Like we have so many drugs right now, and we just haven't even got to the point of, hey, I'm going to sequence your tumor DNA and make sure you get the right treatment. And like we're starting to see little fits and starts happen. Like people will say, hey, you can go do a like pharmacogenomic panel. Like, hey, we know that you metabolize XYZ drug faster, and so we're going to give you more of it. Or hey, you're a slow metabolizer, so we're going to give you less because it's going to stay on your system long. We're just kind of starting to see that, and we've known about that for a really, really long time. But our healthcare system just isn't set up to make things more complicated. It's like, if you're in Seattle or in Chicago or New York or you're in like, one of the best medical centers, like you can kind of figure out ways to do this yourself and advocate for your own healthcare.
this is like it's hard to, this is like, if you're capable, you're putting research together, if you have the money, if you have like, right.
It's like this is doable today.
Yeah.
And it's just like that it doesn't scale. And how does someone even become armed with the information that like, wait, I should be asking these questions?
Yeah.
Like this is, I think, a really big challenge in healthcare, and I don't know the solution to it. And you see lots of, like, to your point of optimism, I see lots of people trying to build these solutions, saying, hey, we're going to figure out the right way to tailor your chemotherapy regime for you and not just the generic one. We're going to figure out the way to give you the best care you need. I think it's probably starting at drugs is a hard one. I think it's probably easier to start with like the other side of healthcare of like, hey, you should be taking GLP-1s. Hey, you should be changing your diet. You should be exercising more. But I don't think we should stop building there because I do think we're going to get there eventually. It's just like, it's been surprisingly hard how hard it is to say the science says you should take this drug, and like stringing that together in the healthcare system has just proved really, really hard. But we're getting there. Like,
is it because of like the reimbursement component, the delivery component? What's the hard?
I think it's reimbursement. I think it's delivery. I think it's just like all of the above.
Okay.
Right. It's like right now there's a lot of just in medicine by checkbox, right? Of like, hey, what gets paid for by your insurance company? Like you need to go redo all this like evidence-based medicine, right? It's really challenging to run the clinical trial to say, hey, your tumor has, you or your tumor, whatever it is, has this genomic profile or this metabolic profile, and therefore, like, you should get this disease. Like, how do you run the clinical trial to prove that's efficacious versus not? Like, we are in a evidence-based medicine, like, and we should be, don't get me wrong. and you say, hey, like the vibes are good to give you this different medicine. Like, how do you run the clinical trial? Like, you look at clinical trials and there are hundreds of patients, and so it's just like, and especially with these drugs that have like are gone generic, like then who is going to pay for that clinical trial? Like, there's a case to be said, hey, the government should pay for it and
Right.
whatnot, but like it's just really hard to figure out how you contort the whole healthcare system to drive that forward, even though it might be the best thing for human health.
Yeah, this is where like maybe we have hopefully raised a generation of successful founders that find success and are altruistic in some degree, and
Yeah.
Arc Institute is like kind of
Oh
working in
yeah.
this space and whatever else. What gets you most excited about like just this next 5 to 10 years in this specific space? Like if you were
Yeah.
building a company today, if you're like sourcing for a company today,
Yeah.
maybe more than one thing,
Yeah.
but to kind of close out here, what's the most interesting, exciting for you?
I think the most interesting, exciting thing is the pace that you can do the small things, right? Like, I love backing founders who have the big vision and they're like, hey, we've done a bunch of work and built this massive, like, you know, platform to discover a new type of drug. Like, that's always exciting. I love partnering with that, and like, but I don't think that's different than it always has been.
Yeah.
What really is exciting to me is like you can go as a really smart entrepreneur and build all the small pieces of your business. That's just a pain in the butt and go faster, go more efficient. Like, why should you be shopping on, your Thermo Fisher who supplies all your chemicals?
Yeah.
Why should a person be doing that? You can have some AI agent be like, hey, by the way, when this thing's 25% off, buy 6 months worth because the expiration date, we know how fast we go through it, constantly surveying these things. You can automate like the inbound, outbound email from your contract research organizations that are running your animal studies and negotiate autonomously and just like all the things that were like really like a time suck and an attention suck from an entrepreneur. Just, hey, we're going to automate more and more of these things. And I think like Sam Altman was like kind of glib and like, hey, like you're going to see the first person $1 billion company out there in
Yeah.
AI. And like, I think that's actually like the easiest thing in life sciences, where you're just like, you develop a drug that cures a thing and that's worth billions of dollars. Like,
Yeah.
with more and more of these tooling out there, like, why can't that be one person who has a unique biological insight and is going to go contract with an antibody manufacturer in China and, then have a perfect translation phone call.
Yeah.
Oh, with using language models. So you don't have to worry about like, oh my God, how do I find someone who speaks Chinese to go negotiate with the, like, if you're gonna run your trial in China, like all these little pieces come together, and how are you really clever about designing the fastest, most innovative, lowest barrier to entry startup just across any sector. And like, I just love seeing that. And like, all these young entrepreneurs I have like the absolute pleasure of talking with on a daily basis, like just blow me out of the water with the ways they're thinking about solving little problems
Yeah.
with tech solutions. Like, that's what's most exciting to me.
Yeah. This is interesting to like, yeah, I mean, why see put out this request? I think they usually put a request for topics, and this time it was a request for we want a 10% billion-dollar like
Yeah.
company or someone who plans to at least do it only
Yeah.
this way. And that's actually interesting. Great point that like life sciences could be the first thing here with like a scientific unlock, and then everything else being automated.
Why not?
That'd be super exciting.
I feel like the thing you should always be asking yourself, like both as an entrepreneur and like an investor, is like, why not?
Why not? Yeah, why not? I love it, Joe. This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for
Hey,
hopping on this Look at Fox
thank you so
podcast.
much. Pleasure chatting.
Awesome. I love it.